Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon. Thanks for spending some time of your day with us today. We'll get started in just a minute. I'll let you all join in here, get your coffee, get situated. If you're here last week, you know we've got a great session here planned this morning. I won't delay too much because, as you know, these sessions are jam-packed, and we like to throw as much information as we can in this hour. So thank you for all joining. ELD for drivers. If you're here last week, then you know kind of what to expect. We're talking all things ELD, but we're going to be speaking more from the driver's perspective on a lot of these things. So I know there's a lot of questions last week about some driver things, and feel free to ask those questions. We will have an open Q&A the whole time. Make sure you ask those questions in the Q&A function. If you ask the questions in the chat, we're likely to miss them. They may get covered over with other comments, so please use that Q&A function. Ask any questions that you would like throughout the presentation, anything that comes up. I'll be answering questions as we go throughout the presentation. I'll try to get through as many as we can. If we have some time at the end, I'll try to ask a couple of those, but Lisa is back, and we know how knowledgeable she was last week, so she'll be following up with all these answers to all the questions that get asked. Even if we have 100 questions, we will get all of those answers, put them in a document, send them your way, as well as a recording of this presentation. So after this presentation, you'll get a link to the slide deck that we shared today, the Q&A document, as well as a recording of this. So if you have coworkers stuck in a meeting, if you have to leave halfway through for any reason, no worries, this is all recorded. You can go watch it back or watch it a second time if you missed anything throughout it. So without any further ado, let's welcome Lisa back again to talk about ELD from a driver's perspective.
All right, thanks so much, Ishi. Glad to be here. Hello and welcome to my part 2 of our HOS ELD compliance training with Geotab. This is a day on the road, so we're going to be focusing all from the driver's perspective, everything from logging into the Geotab Drive mobile app, doing their inspections, editing logs, HOS exemptions, violations, and roadside checks. So there's a lot to cover in the next hour. But hang tight, we'll get through it together. Before I go a little bit deeper, just a little bit of background about who I am. Lisa Boskovic. I am a senior training specialist at Geotab. I've been here for about 5 years now. In a previous life, I was a school teacher. I taught U.S. history, and I also worked at FIU down in Miami. I am a Floridian, based in Fort Lauderdale, and so we consider ourselves flow grown down here, and also a grad of UCF in Orlando. Beyond education and nerdy stuff, I also have a background in musical theater. You can see some photos there of me on stage. And then in my personal life, I was married to, my last name comes from Serbian, from the Balkans. And our daughter is right there at a trucking show because her dad was still working in the trucking industry. He started as a driver and now does brokering and dispatch. So that was my first introduction to commercial driving. And he and I do still have a great co-parenting relationship and talk a lot of shop about hours of service and the frustrations of having to comply with the ELD mandate. And hopefully what I'll be able to share with you today is that it's much easier than you think. And there's a good reason why we are using these regulations. But first, let me ask you some questions. In terms of compliance, what is your role? What is your front row seat? Are you an admin? Are you working in dispatch? Or are you a driver? Or maybe none of those titles fit you? I just kind of want to get a read from the room. Last week, I was focusing on the admin side of ELD HOS compliance. But I'm expecting there might be some more drivers here. I do see some drivers that are here, and then also our admins. It's good for our admins to know what the drivers are experiencing in the app and what you need to set up for them to use it. We got some safety folks here too, compliance folks. I'm glad to have you all here, and I saw some folks were telling us where they were coming which part of the world they're calling in from. And it should be either the US or Canada, because these regulations only apply to those two countries. So, all right, glad to hear that. Next question that I have for you is, how well do you know what your drivers see in the app? Have you ever opened it? Have you looked at it a couple of times? Do you use it all the time? Or are you an expert? You could do it blindfolded. All right, and if you've never opened it and you're new, you're going to get a first-hand view of it today. And I do recommend you trying to poke around in there whenever you get a chance. It is very helpful, and there's some folks who are experts, like Tim there, and Bill's demoing it. That's what I do oftentimes too. I work with drivers all the time to get them familiar with the system, and not everyone has used it. So let's see. Never heard of it before. All right, Michael. Well, we're gonna enlighten you today. Last poll question that I have is, which driver workflow generates the most help calls for your team? Forgetting to log in or out? How do you fix a log? Dealing with exemptions like yard move? Or they're in a roadside check right now and they need help? No right or wrong answers here, just kind of curious. Already it seems like log issues are the top concerns, either forgetting to log in or how do they fix their logs. I hear that all the time. One of the number one call drivers at Geotab support is drivers forgetting to log out. And I think many admins can relate to that. The good news is that drivers can fix those issues themselves, and I'm going to make sure to cover that in today's session. And yeah, not knowing what exemptions are, they can be a little nuanced, so we'll talk about those details as well. Now with that, here's my reason why. I like to start with the why in terms of compliance, because if you attended last week or if you've been dealing with ELD HOS compliance, you realize there's a lot to it. It can be complicated, but there's a good reason behind it. And it's because, as you can see from this statistic, fatigued driving is as dangerous as drunk driving. And so these regulations have been put in place to make sure that those drivers are rested enough to safely operate their vehicle on public roadways, so that when I'm taking my daughter to school in the morning, I don't have to worry about a driver falling asleep behind the wheel and running into us. So that's the reason why. Now let's talk about the what. Hours of service are the regulations. In the US, it comes from a branch of the DOT called the FMCSA, and in Canada, it comes from the CCMTA. So there's a big disclaimer here that is reminding everybody that I'm not here to give legal advice. I won't tell you if you need to comply, which rule set you should be on, or any of that. If you have legal questions, you take them to your regulatory agency, whether it's the FMCSA in the US or the CCMTA in Canada. And the regulations, the hours of service regulations, have been in existence in the US since the 1930s. We used to keep track of them on paper, and these are what paper logs look like. And in case the technology ever fails, you should have some paper logs as a backup in your driver's truck so that they can write them down. But like anything done on paper, there are a lot of limitations in terms of keeping track, losing them, spilling your coffee on them. Drivers historically could also get a little bit creative on what they wanted to log on paper for officers to see versus what they might submit to payroll. And so when the technology advanced enough that we could take those paper logs and put them in electronic format, that is what this graph is showing you right here. These are ERODs, electronic records of duty status. And that's what our Geotab ELD is producing, is those E-logs right there, those ERODs. And it became mandated that if your vehicle was new enough to be able to create electronic records, that is what the ELD mandate says. You are required to keep electronic logs. Again, I won't tell you if you need to comply with the ELD mandate, but if you're here in this session, most likely you and your drivers are needing to do that, because it is now officially in hard enforcement in both the US and Canada for a couple of years now. Now let's talk about the ELD, electronic logging device. That's what Geotab is manufacturing and supporting, is our ELD system in order to comply with the HOS regulations. It's a three-part system. The first is the hardware. This is our Geotab GO device, and it is plugged into that truck, and based on the behavior of that vehicle, it will change the status of that driver automatically. If the vehicle is moving more than 5 miles an hour, it automatically switches to the drive status. If the vehicle is stopped for 5 minutes or more, it automatically goes to on duty. If the vehicle ignition is turned off, the HOS status automatically changes to on duty. It's very important for your drivers to know that the system will never, ever, 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 never automatically put them in off duty. The off-duty status is strictly a manual change done through the second part of our ELD, which is the Geotab Drive mobile app. That app is free to download. You can just type in Geotab Drive app, and you can find the link to download either the iOS or the Android version of this app completely free. And this is the driver-facing interface for the ELD. This is where they take their finger and they press the off button on that screen to go off duty, because the system never automatically puts them off duty. They'll also use this app for their asset inspections, and if they encounter a roadside check, they will use this mobile app, Geotab Drive. So the automatic information from the truck using the GO device and the manual data that's coming in from the Geotab Drive mobile app all goes up to the cloud, and that goes to our MyGeotab platform. This is where our administrators are living, configuring all of the settings and the profiles and looking at reports and the live map to track where their vehicles are. That's all in the MyGeotab portal. So these three parts of the system are working together to create the complete ELD. Geotab is a certified ELD provider in both the US and in Canada. And it's transmitting all of that data using cellular connectivity. So I'm often asked, what happens if there is no cell connection? Sometimes your drivers might be in a dead zone, and that is okay because there is internal storage within the GO device, and it can log generally within about 30 days worth of information. And then as soon as it goes back into coverage, all of that timestamp data is sent back up to the cloud. Even if they are stopped during a roadside check and they are outside of cell coverage, they are still in compliance because there is a way for officers to review those logs directly on the Drive app. So that's my quick laydown of the whole HOS and ELD portion. Now let's dive deeper into the day in the life of a driver. We're going to talk about Tom Truck Driver today. Here he is, everything he needs to do from the beginning of his shift to what happens when he's out on the road, and then also at the end of the day when he is getting ready to head back home. And I am putting a link to the driver's guide to the Drive app right here in the meeting chat, and you will get a copy of this slide deck and the recording in our follow-up email that Genevieve will send out. But almost all of the content that I'm going to be covering today can be found in that Drive app guide that is linked in the meeting chat. So starting with the beginning of the day, sun is just starting to come up, and Tom is going to have to log in, and he's going to have to do his inspection. We'll talk about the login workflow, because it's not just one button and you're in like Flynn. There are multiple steps that Tom needs to take in order to be properly logged in and start his day. So the first is pretty simple. He's just got to use his username and his password. If Tom doesn't remember his password, he's human after all. There is a forgot password link that he can send, and it will reset his password, send the link for him to reset his password to his username, which is why it's best practice to have a valid email address as the driver's username. If it's not a valid email address, then he's going to have to call his administrator or call Geotab to try and help him figure out how to reset his password. And that just takes so much time when he can fix it himself by resetting his own password and having it sent to his email. Next step is selecting his vehicle. Now, Tom is always driving the same truck every day, so it's going to be pinned right there at the top of the list. But maybe if he's using a different vehicle that day, he could look down at the bottom of the list and see what else is there. It will do a GPS search based on where Tom is standing, and then he can select that vehicle. If for some reason he doesn't see it in that list, he can type the name of it right here in this box here, and it will pull up for him. Now, sometimes if Tom is logging into a vehicle and someone forgot to log out last night, it's going to say, hey, Tom, if you log in right now, it's going to kick out Anna, who was there last night. And do you want to do this? Yes or no? If he says no, it's going to move him forward with no vehicle attached. Otherwise, if he says yes, it's going to kick out Anna, who forgot to log out yesterday. And now Tom is the one that is going to be driving that vehicle. This is an optional step. If Tom is required to attach a trailer, he will go here to the little plus sign on this line that says trailers, and he can assign a trailer from the database to his vehicle. And then also the third optional choice here is shipments. He can click on the plus sign and put a name of whatever he's shipping today. Is it cookies? Is it electronics? Whatever the case might be, he can put it in there. You can attach multiple trailers and multiple shipments, but this is not a required step. This is depending on your organization and what kind of information you need to keep track of. Now, here is the step that if Tom sees it, he needs to pause and he needs to take action. So the great thing about the Geotab ELD is that it has multiple fail-safes in place to try and prevent Tom from going into violation. So if Tom is signing in and he sees this big red warning button, it's saying that he doesn't have any time left. It's going to check and make sure he has available hours before he starts working for the day. And what it says is he's got no time left in any of his limits. Did you forget to go off duty? And this is Tom going, oh no, I did forget to sign out yesterday. What am I going to do? Well, tap here and add a duty status log. That is a link. He can click on that link that says tap to add a duty status log, and he can add a manual log himself. So when he clicks on that link, it is taking him to the logs page of the Geotab Drive app. You can also access this page outside of the login workflow. It's on the HOS screen and then the logs tab. And this is where he can look at his rods. This is showing him his 24-hour work period from midnight to midnight. And in green, these lines are going to show which status he's in, whether it's on duty, drive, SB, or off duty. So here he was on duty this entire time, and this time that it was driven, it was a violation because he didn't have enough time. So what is he going to do? You can add log. So when he's clicking that, click here to add a log as part of the workflow, it will take him straight to this box right here. But if he needs to access it outside of logging in, he can just click on the add log button. He's going to select his status. In this case, it would be off duty. Then the date and time, which was yesterday at 5 p.m. when he finished working and was too excited and just left for the day without logging out. And then if he tries to hit the add button right now, it won't let him because it requires an annotation. Any edits that you need to make in the system have to have an explanation to why you're doing it. So in this case, Tom is going to say, forgot to log out in the annotation box, and then he can click on the add button. And now that new manual log has been added into his record. Now that log will only go into effect after he verifies it. And verifying logs is another step that is part of the login workflow. It's going to prompt your drivers every time they sign in and sign out of the app to verify their logs. And when I train drivers, I recommend they get in the habit of verifying all of their logs every time they sign in and out of the app, just to keep things clean. So all they have to do is just click the little thumbs up button to verify an individual day's logs, or they can scroll down to the bottom of that list and verify all of their days. They can also choose to skip it if they're not in the mood for it, but it's important for them to know they only have 14 days to electronically verify their logs. If they don't verify their logs within that required 14-day period and you get audited, that could be a violation for you as a carrier because your driver isn't doing their required verification. This verification can only be done by the drivers themselves. It is like verifying, certifying. There are some interchanges. It's the same thing with rods or logs. There's a lot of different terminology that we'll use. In the system, it is saying verify logs. And so they only have 14 days to do it. It is like their digital signature of their daily activity of that 24-hour period. Only the driver can do it. Our admins, which I spoke about last week, have an unverified logs report that they can monitor and make sure that all of their drivers have verified their logs as required within that 14-day period. Once a driver verifies a log, then it goes into full effect. It becomes green on the rods, and their availability will be calculated based on that information. Next up is unassigned logs. And this may or may not happen to Tom depending on what that truck was doing when he wasn't in it. So one of the reasons an unassigned log would appear is because Tom forgot to sign in yesterday and then was driving around as a ghost. And that becomes an unverified log. If that was him forgetting to log in yesterday, he's going to find that log and select it and click Assign to Me. Okay, certify or verify, it's fine. It means the same thing. It is their digital signature of their 24-hour work period. It is a required field. They are prompted to do it every time they sign in and out of the app. Now, unassigned logs, if now Tom did not do this movement of that vehicle without logging in, it might have been a maintenance move or a yard move that was done overnight. And in that case, he's just going to skip it. I have been asked by drivers, well, why wouldn't I just claim it? It keeps popping up over and over again. If you didn't drive it, then don't claim that log. And it's your admin's problem. And that's something that last week on the admin side of the training that we have mentioned, there is an unassigned or unidentified logs page. That's another thing with terminology that you can see different wording, unassigned or unidentified. And that is a different report that the admins can then annotate as yard moves. In the app, it is done as part of the login workflow if there are unassigned logs. So they are not prompted to look for them. Otherwise, it is part of the login workflow. Next up, he's still not logged in yet. This is the last step that Tom has, and it's his asset inspection. And talking about other versions of what these are called. If you hear the phrase DVIR, Driver Vehicle Inspection Report, in the system, you will see it listed as asset inspection. And so here on the asset inspection page is the name of the vehicle and an inspect button. If Tom has attached a trailer to his vehicle, there will be a second box underneath it with the name of that vehicle, and he can also inspect the trailer. But it is required for him to do a pre-trip inspection, so he's going to press that inspect button, and it will pull up his defect list to do the walk around the vehicle. Tom will say he is doing a pre-trip inspection. There is also an in-trip and a post-trip inspection that Tom can do, but he's just starting his day, so it is a pre-trip inspection. If there's, they will be prompted to do an inspection as part of the login workflow. And there is also built-in rules from the admin side if a pre-trip or a post-trip inspection is missing, and you can customize the grace period as to when the last time or how long the last trip was if they are going to be required to do another pre-trip inspection. And I will address some questions as I see them in the chat. I won't be able to get to all of them. There we go. Use the Q&A feature is the best way to get your questions answered. So I have time to go through everything. Now, an important thing about the asset inspection that Tom will be doing is that he has the ability to take a photo of the defect and include it with the report. So in this screenshot, you'll see that there's a missing rim. So he would take a picture of that. And he can add additional remarks if he would like to. And then at the very end of his inspection, he will sign it. Again, this is like a little digital certification that, yes, he has completed his inspection. If he reports a defect, there are built-in rules within MyGeotab, so an admin can be immediately notified if a defect is reported. And the checklist, the defect list that the drivers are using in their inspections is fully customizable. From within MyGeotab on the admin side of things, under the maintenance drop-down area, there is an asset inspection page. And there is a link there for the defect lists. And you can create as many custom defect lists as you would like. You can create them fully from scratch, or you can use one of our built-in templates and tweak and adjust what you would like as necessary. You can remove parts entirely with the X button. You can add new parts with the plus sign, and then you can designate individual defects as either major, minor, or unregulated. You can also create custom lists for vehicles under device or for trailers as well. I often will see customers who have both dry trailers and refrigerated trailers. And so in those scenarios, if it has different pieces of equipment to be inspected, you would create a custom checklist for that. Now, once Tom has certified his inspection, he is done with his inspection, it will automatically place him on duty for the time that he has started that inspection. Because once the inspection starts, that's when Tom begins working, and that will impact his workday limit that we will be talking about. And you can still do... So I'm not sure, and any questions, I do recommend everyone put in the Q&A. I'm keeping an eye on the chat a little bit, but in terms of inspection, I'm going through the standard Geotab Drive workflow from our driver's perspective, which includes a pre-trip asset inspection. Just as a side note, Geotab users who do not need to comply with hours of service are still able to use the Drive app for asset inspection. If you want to link it in with your maintenance program, that is something that's possible. We do have partners that will integrate with our system for their own asset inspection, perhaps. But within the Geotab Drive app, for the purpose of hours of service today, that is the workflow that I just went through with you. And here on the, also something to note is that when Tom finishes his inspection and it puts him automatically on duty from the time he started that inspection, it will also give him a little flag at the top of the screen that tells him how long his inspection took. There is no mandated time limit of how long an inspection should take. But you as administrators can look in the asset inspection page and see how long your driver's inspections are taking and get an idea if they're just pencil whipping through that list and not actually inspecting something. Because if they are stopped during a roadside check and an officer identifies a broken piece of equipment that was not marked on their inspection, that will be a violation. So there are also some third-party marketplace partners that can also add additional layers of verification when it comes to drivers going through all the required steps in an inspection. You'll also notice here on my dashboard screenshot that there's an asset inspection button right there with a little wrench, and it says one log needs repaired. So if there's a defect reported, it'll be noted right here in red. And the next time a driver signs in, if it hasn't been resolved yet, it'll prompt them to review the previous inspection, and they'll either need to mark it as resolved or as not necessary for safe operation of the vehicle. Now also, so that's the asset inspection tile. There's a messages tile here, so the drivers and administrators can communicate to one another through this app. We also have here, this is where it says My Truck. That's the asset tile. So if for some reason Tom's truck breaks down and he needs to hop in another vehicle for the day, he can just click on that asset tile and he can change which vehicle he is currently driving. There's the roadside check button here on the dashboard. We'll talk more about roadside checks, and a settings tile as well. And if there are additional add-ins that have been installed to the app, they will be present on the dashboard, and I will talk about the ELD info add-in in just a few minutes as well. Next up, all right, he's logged in, he is on the road. So how is Tom going to be managing his available hours, using exemptions, and what would happen during a roadside check? So hours of service, how many hours that Tom has in different limits, like his workday or his driving limit, will depend on which rule set he is on. And here is yet another disclaimer that is going to tell you that at Geotab, we will not tell you which rule set you should be on. That is a question for the FMCSA or the CCMTA. But there is this resource right here called the Supported HOS Rule Sets page. It looks just like this, and I am going to put a link to this resource in the meeting chat for you to review. It has definitions of all of the different limits that are available, and all of the supported rule sets that Geotab uses. U.S. federal rule sets if they are crossing state lines, intrastate rule sets if they are operating within a single state like California. And then down at the bottom below, the U.S. rule sets are our Canadian federal rule sets. And those are split along the 60-degree latitude. So north of 60 or south of 60, depending where your driver is operating, that will depend which rule set that they will be on. And as an example, I'm going to show you one of the most common U.S. federal rule sets that we come across. It is the USA property rule set with a 60-hour, 7-day cycle limit. So the two consecutive limits that are up at the top, off duty is 10 hours and work day is 14 hours. So 10 plus 14 is our 24-hour workday. In its simplest form, it means that he has to be off duty consecutively for 10 hours, and then he can be working for 14 hours. Working is a combination of both driving and on-duty time. So within that 14-hour workday, he can only drive a total of 11 hours on this rule set. But he can't do all 11 hours in one stretch. He has to take a minimum of a 30-minute break before he reaches 8 hours of driving. So he cannot drive more than 8 hours before needing a break. And that break needs to be a minimum of 30 minutes. It cannot be 29 minutes and 55 seconds, or it doesn't count. Also important to note that rest break can be in the on-duty status. It is a break from driving. So he cannot drive all 11 hours on this rule set in one stretch. He has to take a 30-minute break before he drives more than 8. And that can be in an on-duty or off-duty status in order to get the qualifying break. And as the name of this rule set states, there is a cycle limit. That means he cannot work more than 60 hours in a rolling 7-day period. So again, working a combination of drive and on-duty time. And as long as he stays within that 60-hour cycle limit in a 7-day period, he can keep rolling it over and over and over again. If Tom takes a 34-hour off-duty time consecutively, it'll reset his hours, and he'll be able to get a new bucket of cycle limits and limits. Now, that again is just an example on this particular rule set. If your driver is using a different rule set, the hours that are listed and their limits might be different based on that particular rule set. If Tom exceeds any of these limits on his rule set, it is a violation. It's important to know that drivers are prompted within the app if they are approaching violation 2 hours before, 1 hour before, 30 minutes before, and immediately before. So on that HOS screen, it's going to give him big yellow and red warnings as he's getting closer. Last week, I mentioned that admins have reports that they can identify if a driver is approaching their limits as well and get them to stop before a violation occurs. Violations occur when that vehicle is moving when it's not supposed to be. Now, this is the HOS status screen. This is the screen that our drivers are going to be looking at the majority of their day. Before I was showing you the dashboard, which had this button highlighted. This is the HOS button right here. They can access it along this bottom menu over here, or they can select the HOS tile from the dashboard. The HOS tile has got the little stopwatch icon on it. And this is the HOS screen is the same where he can access logs. So this is the logs tab of it, but the status tab is what the driver is going to be looking at the majority of the time. I will mention, Matt, about safety, but put those questions in the Q&A as well so we can address them. But I will mention some of the safety stats. But the primary purpose of the Geotab Drive mobile app is for hours of service compliance. So a lot of it's about checking how many hours they've been driving and if they've had their required rest and off-duty time. So here, based on the rule set that is assigned to the driver, in this case, it's that USA property, 60 hours, 7 day, it'll do the math and give timers for how many hours he has left in any of those limits. So based on the rule set selected here, and that is applied by the administrator in MyGeotab, it will calculate and do all the math for him. So that's another great thing about the Geotab ELD is the driver doesn't have to sit there and write down or think about how much time. The system's automatically going to count down all of that for him. And what we'll also see on this screen are the 4 available statuses that a driver can be in. It's currently on off-duty status, which remember is only a manual status change. And then there's the drive button and the on-duty button. But in reality, our users don't have to press those D and on buttons because the Geotab GO device will automatically switch them between drive and on-duty based on the behavior of the vehicle. If it's moving more than 5 miles an hour, it'll switch to drive. If it's stopped for 5 minutes or longer, it'll switch to on-duty. The only button he really needs to worry about the most is off-duty. Then I'm asked about this SB button over here. SB stands for sleeper berth, which is a physical location in the truck like this where a driver can sleep. It is also a special provision called the sleeper berth provision where it is used like off duty, but there are certain nuances to it where you can split your consecutive off duty time between a qualifying short break and a long break. It's a little bit complicated. A lot of folks that I work with will have the SB button disabled that you can do from within MyGeotab. So your driver only needs to see off-duty, drive, and on-duty. Back to our HOS screen right here. Another thing your drivers will be able to do from this screen is their exemptions, apply their exemptions. When they click on the exemptions button, there will be a window that pops up that looks like this. The only exemptions that they will see here in this list are dependent on what their administrators have enabled for them. So here is Sarah, the administrator. We talked a lot about her last week. When she is setting up her driver profiles in MyGeotab, she does that under the People, Users, and Drivers screen. And then when a driver has the right clearance, like Drive App User, they will have the HOS Settings tab visible. If you don't see the HOS settings tab visible on the top of a driver's profile, you need to check their security clearance. So when they have the right clearance to see the HOS settings tab, here's where she'll select which rule set they have to them. In this case, it's USA Property 60 hours, 7 day. And depending on which rule set that is selected, might change what available exemptions are available. And the main ones that you're going to see here are in green. Yard move allowed, and I will talk about the details of these exemptions. Personal conveyance is this one right here. And then adverse driving conditions. So let's talk about each of those three main HOS exemptions. Important to note when I talk about the word exemption, it is not to be confused with the word exception. In Geotab, an exception is when a Geotab rule is broken, it creates an exception. So if I'm speeding, I have created a speeding exception. I broke that rule. An exemption is specific to HOS. And that means that the rules of my normal rule set that I need to follow are going to be a little bit different because I am using an exemption. The first one being adverse driving conditions. This is enabled by the Geotab Drive by default. So unless you manually disable it, all drivers will have access to adverse driving conditions, ADC. And the scenarios that you're supposed to use adverse driving is unexpected weather or traffic issues. And the best example I use for this is if your driver starts their day and encounters a 10-car pileup on the interstate, and it's going to prevent him from getting off the road within his allowed limit, he can enable the adverse driving condition exemption, and it will give him up to 2 extra hours of work in order to find a safe haven and get off the road. That is different than if your driver starts their workday and ends up in downtown Miami at 5 p.m. on a workday. Rush hour is completely expected. It happens every day between 5 and 6 p.m. In Miami, it's even worse. But this is supposed to be for unexpected events. And I warn drivers that when you want to use adverse driving, it could be tempting to say, oh, I'm so close to my destination, I just need a little bit more time. But know that your DOT officers are trained to look for patterns of abuse when it comes to using these exemptions. And it's your CDL that's on the line. So use them wisely. And don't think that you're being so sneaky that an officer won't be able to identify you misusing those exemptions and give you a violation. Next one is yard move. So an admin will need to enable this exemption for a driver to be able to use it. And it will still count towards their on-duty time for their workday limit, but it will not deduct their drive time for the day. And that's because they are moving that vehicle within a non-public area, like a truck yard, like you see here, this parking lot full of vehicles. If I'm moving it from one bay of the warehouse to another one, I would enable yard move, and that is only going to count against my on-duty time, not my drive time, because I am not on a public roadway. Important to note here that in Canada, it is mandated that they cannot go faster than 32 kilometers an hour in yard move. If they exceed 32 kilometers an hour while using yard move, it'll kick them out of that status and put them into drive. US customers have a built-in rule under the compliance area of our rules engine that allows them to put their own speed limit. You can also use that built-in rule in conjunction with our zones. If you create a geo fence around your truck yard and a driver exits that zone using yard move, it will switch them to drive. Make sure to put all of your questions in the Q&A because we all have 15 minutes left. There's a lot that I need to cover, so I want to make sure your questions are answered if in the Q&A or following up after our session. And then other folks will be able to see the questions and answers when you use that function in the webinar. And I know there's always a lot of questions when it comes to compliance, so please, I encourage you to ask them. The last exemption that I'm going to talk about, standard exemption. This is not all encompassing of all of the exemptions. There's a lot of specific niche exemptions you might see for oil well or rail or agriculture and different kinds of things like that. But these three are our main ones: adverse driving, yard move, and personal conveyance. Personal conveyance is when Tom is off duty. He's getting his 10 consecutive hours off duty for rest, but he's at a truck stop. And he heard about a great Mexican place on the other side of town, and he's craving some tacos. So he's going to drive his truck over to that Mexican restaurant. Problem is, if he moves that truck more than 5 miles an hour, it's going to automatically put him in the drive status, and it's going to interrupt his required off-duty time. So what does Tom do? He logs in with personal conveyance, so that movement for personal reasons while he's off the clock doesn't count against him. It will just be labeled as personal conveyance. Another difference between Canada and the US in terms of PC is that in Canada, there's a maximum daily limit of 75 kilometers a day. He cannot use personal conveyance more than 75 kilometers in a day in Canada by law. In the US, you can choose to add a maximum daily limit to personal conveyance because, again, there are commonly abused exemptions that you can get flagged on during an audit or a roadside check. So putting a daily limit in there is a good way to try and keep that in check. Speaking of checks, roadside check. Now, this is probably not Tom's favorite part of the day. He went to a weigh station and an officer says, hey, let me check out your records. And so the first thing Tom might want to do is put in a one-time PIN that will lock the officer into the roadside check mode of this vehicle. In order to go into roadside check mode, Tom is going to click on this little eyeball with a magnifying glass that says roadside check. It'll prompt him to add a one-time 4-digit PIN. He puts in those numbers. It can be whatever numbers he wants, verifies those numbers, and then he hands over that device to the officer, and the officer is going to review those records. Really, what the officer wants to do is digitally transfer those records over to the officer's own device in order to review electronically. So they'll press either email transfer or web service transfer. If they're not in the US, they click on not in the US, and Canada has their own buttons that they'll press. If Tom is outside of cell coverage, or if there is missing information on the driver profile, that might prevent the officer from digitally transferring over those records. And in that case, it says having trouble, compliance print. That will manually display the records on Tom's device for the officer to review. In roadside check mode, it's only going to show the officer the required number of days logs, which is like 7 days worth of logs that he can manually review and get a violation on. If the officer looks at it outside of roadside check mode, if he tries to exit it and doesn't know the PIN number to get into Tom's view of it, he'll be able to see all of Tom's logs. The officer only should be able to see what's in roadside check mode. Also, violations are not as clearly identified in the roadside check version of the app versus Tom's version of the app. So that is what roadside check mode is about. And there is a whole guide to roadside checks that is linked right here. I'll actually go ahead and put a link to that in the meeting chat as well. It'll be included in my follow-up resources. Next up. Tom is finally about ready to end his workday. Sun is setting. It's been a long one. He's exhausted and ready for that rest. There might occasionally during Tom's workday, he might come up with some connection issues. So I just want to point out that on the top right of the screen, if he ever sees this little exclamation point with a triangle around it, that would tell him that there might be something that is disconnected. In this case, it's the GPS. If it ever says vehicle disconnected, that would mean that the hardware that the Geotab device might have come unplugged or is loose. And then the Geotab Drive connected, you'll see those cell bars. That means that the cellular connectivity is out of range. The last warning that may come up, and it's not as urgent, but it's a good reminder for Tom. It says telematics cable unplugged. So best practice is for Tom to keep the device that he is using for ELD plugged into a power source at all time. Because if that device loses battery power, he is out of compliance. So Geotab is going to give him a friendly reminder if it's not plugged into a power source right here so that he can try and make sure it doesn't run out of battery. Next up, there are required documents that Tom needs to keep in the cab of the truck at all times, either downloaded as PDF or printed out on paper and in the glove box if he's so inclined. But the easiest thing for Tom to do is have the ELD info add-in. This is a free Geotab marketplace add-in. And once an admin installs it in the database, all drivers will have access to it in the app. On the dashboard, it'll appear as a tile right like this that says ELD info. When they click on that button, it'll show the in-vehicle documents that are required. The data transfer guide, the ELD manual, the driver's guide to the app, and also the guide to diagnostics and malfunctions. Because we all know that technology is great, but sometimes things go wrong. So what do we do in those situations? So here's a little guide about diagnostics versus malfunctions. Diagnostics are more minor. If they go out of cell coverage, for example, if they're in a dead zone, that would be a diagnostic. Once they re-enter the cellular connectivity, it'll automatically get rid of that diagnostic. However, if there are enough small diagnostics that are repeatedly occurring, that indicates that there's a larger issue, and that becomes a malfunction. Malfunctions need to be reviewed by the driver or administrator and manually cleared. Like if it keeps losing cell connectivity, there might be an issue going on within the device and the SIM card that has become a malfunction, and you need to review it. Malfunctions have to be addressed within 7 days. Administrators have a dashboard report that they can see how many unresolved diagnostics or malfunctions are currently active, so they can keep an eye on that. Now, someone had asked a question about safety if a driver is speeding or harsh braking. This is a recent addition to our Drive app. You can enable this with a custom security clearance, where if you type in the word safety in your clearances area in MyGeotab, you'll see view safety insights in the Drive app. If that is enabled on your driver's clearance, they will see a tile on their dashboard that says safety. And this is Geotab's collision risk data. So based on standardized versions of the ABC rules, harsh acceleration, braking, cornering, and speeding, it will give them a likelihood that they are going to have a collision in the next 100,000 miles or kilometers. So in this case, Tom is doing really well. He's a low risk. He has a 1.2% chance of getting in an accident based on his current driving behavior. And this visibility of their performance on the ABCs is really good for improving driver safety overall. But it does have to be enabled as a security clearance by an administrator in MyGeotab. So we are finally at the end of Tom's day. He is ready to log out. So you'll see that he's looking at the dashboard again here in the app. He's going to click on his name at the top right of the screen. When Tom clicks on his name, it's going to open up this window right here where it would say his name, and he can log out. I do want to point out that if you have co-drivers, team driving, you can add a co-driver by selecting the driver's name up here and then the plus sign for co-driver, and then you'll select who's behind the wheel in the driver's seat at any given period of time, so that activity is attributed to the correct driver. When a driver is starting the log out workflow, and again, this is a workflow. It's not just you press the log out button and you're done. No, you are going to be prompted to complete your end of day tasks, which includes your post-trip inspection. If you've attached trailers and shipments and you want to detach them, it will ask the driver to do that. And then again, it will ask the driver to verify or certify their logs. It is prompted every time they sign in and out of the app. I recommend that they verify or certify their logs every time they sign in and out of the app, but it is optional. They can skip it. And then the very last screen they'll see is it'll say, set your HOS duty status. It'll default to off duty, and then they press verify and log out. There are some rare scenarios where a driver might want to select stay and on duty and log out in the on-duty status, but they will have to remember to go back and log out later when they're done working. Because if they just turn the ignition off and walk away, or they don't complete the entire log out workflow, they are going to be sitting in on duty the entire time. And that's going to really mess up their workday limits and cause violations. So when I train drivers, I remind them to go off duty, verify and log out, and you'll know that you've logged out when you see the log in screen again. So make sure your drivers are seeing the log in screen, and that way they verified they have logged out for the day and they are off duty. So to recap, we went through everything we needed to, just enough time, talking about the log in and log out workflow, how the asset inspection or DVIR process works. They can do pre-trips, in-trips, and post-trip inspections. Editing a log, adding a manual log is done from the HOS screen on the Logs tab. They press the plus sign, they add their log, their required annotation, save it, verify it, and it goes into effect. We talked about our main HOS exemptions like yard move, adverse driving conditions, and personal conveyance. They can apply those as needed if an administrator has enabled it for them in the MyGeotab platform. We've also talked about those violation alerts 2 hours before they get to a limit, 1 hour before, 30 minutes before, and immediately before. So our drivers are warned as they are getting close to any of their limits to avoid violations. And then the last thing we talked about was roadside checks. Locking an officer into roadside check mode using a 4-digit PIN, and then how they can do the compliance print. If it's not digitally transferring the rods to the officer, they can press the compliance print button and review it on the driver's device. So in the last 2 minutes that I have here, I just want to ask you 2 final poll questions. Right after this hour session that we had together, how confident are you feeling about going through the Drive app? You still need a script? You think you can handle the basics? You're feeling pretty good about it, or are you ready to take over my job? No wrong answer. Hopefully you know a little bit more today after since you started, especially for those newer folks. It looks like a lot of folks are feeling good about the basics, which is great. And now my last poll question is, what do you think the first thing is that you're going to do when you leave this webinar? Are you going to explore the Drive app yourself? I would encourage you to do that. Do you want to make sure that all of the available exemptions are enabled for your drivers in MyGeotab? Creating a cheat sheet might be a great thing. Remember, you'll get my slide deck. I have a lot of customers who ask to use my slides when they're training their drivers. You're more than welcome to do that. Sometimes it's a good idea just to do a ride along with one of your drivers and ask them questions, see what their biggest challenges are so that you can address them. And hey, yeah, if you want to do all of the above, like Rochelle and Amelia, if you want to do a couple of different ones, I encourage you, the more you use it, the more comfortable you'll feel. Compliance is complicated, but Geotab really makes it simple once you get the hang of it. If you need to learn more, because there's only so much we can cover in an hour, I encourage everyone to visit our Geotab Academy. I'll put the link to this in the meeting chat as well. There are videos and tutorials that you can go through. You can share with your drivers or other folks in your organization. Very helpful to learn more about the Geotab Drive app and the MyGeotab capabilities for compliance, and then for other things like safety and productivity and all of that great stuff. And so thank you again very much, everyone. We are at 12 o'clock, right at time. Ishi,
Awesome.
any questions that we didn't have time to answer yet?
No, there's so many questions in there. I tried to answer as many as I could, but like you guys know, we will answer all those questions. We'll get them into a document. We'll work on those for the next couple days and send it out to you guys. Thank you so much, Lisa. I mean, the information was great that we got today, and thank you everybody for staying this whole time. And come back next week. Next week we're talking about Go Focus, same time, same place. So be here. It'll be a very similar presentation. So come with your questions ready. And thank you for spending the last hour with us, everybody. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you very much, everyone. Bye.